I'm Samantha Wolfe. I'm here as part of Internet of Senses to talk about sight, and I'm super excited for my conversation today with Tupac Martir. He is a world-renowned Mexican visual artist, a creative director, a multimedia artist, founder of Satore Studios. And if somebody says, who's an innovator, who's a visionary, he comes to mind. So I'm super excited to have him here. And I realized before we set this up, even though you visited my class, that you're actually in my book.
I
Like
am indeed.
here. And that's how actually I got introduced to you, is through my co-author, when we were like, who should we include in our book that are amazing artists that are out there? And he made sure that that was in there. And then so I was like, who is this person? And then I think I invited you to my class and then now to the podcast. So thank you so much for coming and joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me here. Yeah, this should be fun.
Yeah, one of the things that gets me super excited about you, and the more and more I learn about you and the more I listen to prepare for this, is you kind of again, it's like what I love thinking about, like, what is innovation? What does it mean to be innovative? And I potentially oversimplify it sometimes by saying, well, you take one industry and apply it to another industry. You take one technology and then add another technology. And you like do that to the extreme, to the like nth degree of like, what if we add all the technologies? What if we add all the artists? What if we have tons and tons of different experiences? And I love I absolutely love that. And do you do that on purpose? Or you just does it just happen naturally?
I don't really have a dartboard where I just grab and go, all right, we're gonna do this. I don't have that now. I think it would be a lot easier to
The
understand that for my
magic eight
team.
ball of two
Yeah,
projects.
yeah. If
Which
that
one
was the
shall we do
case, I think my
today?
team would be a lot happier with me. But no, unfortunately, it doesn't. I think it comes from when I went to school, actually. When I started college back in 1995. I originally went to school to study psychology with a minor in photography.
I'm a psychology major and I wanted to be a photographer. So maybe that's another reason why I like you.
You resonate. Yeah. But it was really interesting because as soon as I got to college, I went to school at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. And as soon as I got there, I started working with Father Dole, who is one of the professors, and he's a photographer for National Geographic. And
That was my dream. I think I have some books in here of National Geographic, but I was
you
like, I
probably
can't sit there for 20 hours for one shot. Like I don't have the patience for that.
then you've probably seen a picture that kind of got Father Dole a bit famous. And so working with him, I realized that I didn't want to study humans and their psychology in the way that I thought at first. I realized that what I really enjoyed was actually sitting in front of them and trying to figure out who this person was in front of me and who the hell I was based on the interaction with I had with them. And so that then changed my major into a BA, so a bachelor in fine arts. And at that moment, I started working with the genius, lovely human that was John Thien. And he unfortunately he passed away not long ago. But he's the one, I always say, he's the one that made me an artist. He's the one that looked to understand really what was behind first of all my drawings, and then as I move into painting, which is a really difficult thing for a lot of people, because when you draw, most people draw like this, or my drawing was always really big, so I was always about that far away from about, I was about 3 inches away from the end of the pencil when I started drawing properly. And so when I moved to painting, which is really difficult for a lot of people, is because all of a sudden you have 3 inches in front of you, which is, for me, it was just the easiest thing because that's just exactly what I needed to do. And so John then started exploring with me a lot of moving towards using my photography to identify my drawing, and then my drawing to influence the way that I was painting, and then my painting and my drawing got into my photography, And then that got into my etching, and then that got into my ceramics and my way of sculpting. And suddenly it started to kind of become this element. But being a nerd who started coding at the age of
You,
6,
you're in good company.
so I started, I started coding at the age of 6, more out of this thing of what is this language to speak to computers. And so at some point that element started kind of to creep in and wanted to be part of this creative endeavor. Most people didn't understand, like, why was I studying Calc 3 and elements on that side. So and it was like I just found mathematics very interested in a way of how can I manipulate mathematics within the arts
Well,
and
I
these
think that I mean,
abstract
you're
thinking.
very like across so many mediums, like across media. And that's interesting that you said that you're like, and the painting and the drawing and the ceramics and the etching. And, that you're like, it doesn't, whatever the idea is or the concept that you have is not stuck in the technology, whether you call it, traditional
Yeah,
creative or future pushing the boundaries of merging. It's like, well, whatever the idea is
it
what
just
comes.
moves. And the fun part then became how, especially when I started doing, digital art in the late 1990s, of how this process sort of became, and when I look at my work, it's very much the basis of how I do things that are analog, that move to digital, that move to analog, that move to digital, and have this constant flux of going from one to the other on a regular basis, and how they kind of work in symbiotic way in my brain. And so I always blame John for kind of being in my brain, and not only him at the end of the day, John and Littleton and Bob, who were my main three professors, but obviously John was my main tutor. And then there's this element of going to a small university for the arts, which it wasn't really known for the BFA program, and having all these other professors who were really keen on helping. So I could go to one of my art history professors and say, Father, I'm looking at this, and that. And he would say, like, okay, come back in 4 days. And I'll come back in 4 days. And he'll have like 4 carousels of slides that I could sit there and just scroll through and understand and look, and then I can go to him and go, explain me this painting or explain me this piece of art, and he will give me all the elements into it. So then that kind of started moving in the direction of, I find it really funny because you're saying that I move this thing and it's like I also transpose errors, because a lot of the things that I think
No, I mean,
about.
it's so many cross dimensions of things. I had I mean, in a fun way, a very difficult time researching you, because it was like, how do I encapsulate somebody that does so much across so many mediums with so many different so many different experiences, and I love my bullet points, and I was like, well, can I get it down to just a few? And I did get it to a few, which I shared it with you, even though we're going to talk about all of them. But I was like, you push the boundaries of technology, you push the boundaries of what I said, like human experience, and you break the silos of creativity. Those are my like three like attempts. They're not perfect, but those are my three attempts of saying like all the different things that I kept on seeing that you're doing over and over again. And so I'm going to try to break down our conversation a little bit into those buckets, even though it's going to be impossible because, again, you intersect and interconnect across all of them. But because I do tend to focus on emerging technologies, but I also love the arts and I love artists in general. It's actually related to what you had said. I got into my careers, first because I wanted to be nearby artists and creators, and then secondly because I wanted to be nearby developers. And so you're both. You're an artist and a creator and a developer. So when those things intersect, I get particularly excited. But so let's talk a little bit about technology. And you've hinted to it a little bit if you say you just started coding right away. And so how did that sort of understanding of technology evolve over time, and then it's still evolving. You're still experimenting. How has that worked? If we can, I
So I
mean,
have
it's gonna
a
be
I have a
hard
really
to narrow our focus here at all, but go ahead.
I have a very interesting way of seeing technology. And that is, I still have my imaginary friend from when I was a child.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, his name is Bobby. And just in the same way that I use Bobby as a way of seeing the world through the eyes of a child, I see technology as my friend from when I was growing up. So you know how your
You have to
childhood
create a
friend.
virtual human, by the way. You need to create Bobby. I know people. I will introduce you if you don't already know, but keep going.
But this idea of like, you know how you think about your childhood friends and how there's people that out of your childhood friends, most people have disappeared, but then there's some people that have stayed along on the ride with you. That's technology for me. So it's one of my best friends. And so it's always a dialogue, and we might not always agree on how things are, but there's such a love relationship that we're willing to give each other's time to come around and understand each other. And that's the only way that I can explain how I feel with technology.
But that's kind of beautiful because you know, for me, I feel like sometimes it's just people aren't changing. It might be the way that technology allows us to interact might adjust, but kind of, and how we interact, which is that's the psychology, right, of all this might change. But so when do you say, I mean, do you ever see something and get inspired and say, gosh, I need to, when you're like, I'm going to teach an LLM to 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 respond to my movements, and not just in the way that other people do, which is like hand gestures, like everybody was sort of playing around with hand gestures. You're like, no, I'm gonna push that for, like, how do you get to that, the pushing of that boundary?
I'm very human centric in the way that I think. And I think that everything needs to be of, why do I need to limit somebody when their form of expression goes beyond those hands, or goes beyond those eyes, or goes, like, how can I open up the space so that the point of entry for people is a lot more open? That's kind of the way of it, because I'm Mexican and I grew up in Italy, and I use my hands for a lot of things. I use my body, and I use whistles, and I a lot of the times I don't have even a guiding star of what something should be. Is more of a crapshoot of going, right, we're going that way. And I mean, this morning, one of my developers had sent an email to one of the softwares that we're using, and they were saying, well, how are you going to do this? And he had to say, I have no idea. Tupac just came up with this thing that he wants to use your software on Friday afternoon, and he sent an email.
Right.
It's like the first time that I learned about this was on that email. And I just had a conversation with him, and now I think I understand what he wants to do. It's like, do you know how he is? He just gets something in his head and he thinks that he understands the pattern. And so now he's trying to figure out how it's going to work.
Yeah.
I made a little sketch and I went, I think it's like this. And everyone went, yeah, that's simplifying it. That's exactly how it is. Like, okay, then great. Let's just figure out, that we need to code something else and we need to do something. And it's just, that's just the simplification that I have in my brain about, I just this with this with this with this with that. And someone goes, sure, yes, that in the in the big in the big picture of it, that's what it is. The elements to make it work is not as simple. And I'm like, I'm not saying ever it's going to be that simple. If it was that simple, it would have been done already. But I know that this is the way that things need to be in order to create that pattern. And then off we go. And and needless to say, so many people, like, I get a lot of I get a lot of grief that I have a lot of toys and I have a lot of things that I buy and I test them. And then I go, yeah, no, that's not what I wanted. And it was like, well, why didn't you test it? I was like, well, because for what they're using it, it's okay. But I needed to see if this is the correct formula to do it or not. And maybe it is. And maybe sometimes I buy something and I don't use it. And then 3 months later, I'm like, oh, but you know that I do have that toy over there that allows me to do, and then we use that toy for something else, and sometimes
Oh,
they
you
just
said the pencil versus the paintbrush versus, it's that kind of thing. I think it's the innovators in general, they're comfortable being uncomfortable. They're comfortable
Mhm.
not knowing. And that's kind of the fun part. I think that's why it's like you probably, when I'm like, you're in 3 buckets, you're like, no, I'm not. It's more complicated than that. And I'm like, guess what? I just pulled on you what
Yeah.
you do your team. I'm like, here are your 3 buckets. And you're like, no, but this is different. And I'm like, I understand it's different, but directionally, we're going directionally because I like simplifying highly, highly complicated things into different areas so that you can understand it. And then you realize later how complicated it is. Like doing that sketch. I do the
Yeah.
sketch and then you're like, and then somebody gets to understand you in much more detail and realize how much more complicated and creative you are beyond that. I want to also talk about because this is I'm in charge of sight in terms of senses. And how does sight sort of play into this, especially and we're still in our technology bucket. So
Mhm.
where does that interplay with the work that you create?
Um, Coming from being a visual artist, as just in like my first exploration was always photography and then painting and drawing and etching and like that's the I would say that audio was something that probably started really digging into my work in early 2000s.
Yeah, no, I was
Um,
I was lucky that I got the host of the audio version of this is going to be very jealous of this interview, and I'm aware. So that's why I was like, we need to talk a little bit about sight because you are
but
a
oh
musician
yeah,
and a composer and all audio too. Right.
but visually, there's like all these elements of composition. There's all these things that I grabbed my first camera when I was 15 years old, and I had a Minolta, and I remember that I got to the point that I could take pictures without actually looking at my like through the viewfinder. I understood very quickly light and distance and focal lengths, and so I could be taking pictures of you without actually looking at my camera because I just became one with that element. And it's always this thing of composition. What the reason why I love painting and the reason why I love photography is that you have a single image, you have this single composition that needs to talk. And so when I did Nierka, I remember telling people it's a series of paintings on movement, and every single one of these paintings has to have this element into it. And then yes, there's all the other senses that we added to it, but if the visual side of it doesn't work, everything was based on the visual. And then how can I break your expectation of what's about to come, of if the visual's doing this and the sound is doing that, or the visual's doing this and the smell is doing that, as the visual's doing. So it always goes to, you think you're seeing something, but in reality, I'm about to change what you think and the expectation that you want. And so, because we're so gullible as humans by what we see,
Right.
right? That
Agreed.
that in a way we're trained so much about making. I mean, the whole point of don't judge a book by its cover. How many people you judge just by the sheer fact of how they look and what they and it's just in all those little things. Like, how many times do you walk by a restaurant and you look into it and you see if it's, you have no idea, the food could be absolutely crap, but if it looks nice, or it looks, you'll go in, right? And you go in thinking that, oh, it looks nice, but should be okay, right? And I mean, we all do it, right? So there's almost that gullibility of what I can do and how can I trick a human to think that they're seeing something, when in reality I'm kicking their butt on another way, right? And it's the best way of blindsiding people, because they expect, like, I'll never forget. There's this piece by an Argentinian director that is called 4 Feet. I don't know if you've ever seen it, and it's about a woman who's in a wheelchair, and she goes and says, one of her phrases says, people think that I'm an angel because I'm in a wheelchair, but they don't know that I'm a bitch. And I love that. I love that because I was like, yes, you're using that perception that we have and changing it completely. And I think that's the importance of being able to play with this. And I love optical illusions. I love playing with elements of, you think we're going somewhere and then all of a sudden it goes left and you're like, what happen,
No, I love that. And it actually, when you talk about, I remember at the beginning, like, was that how many years ago, especially like 360 experiences. And it was always somebody who was probably like 5'8" shooting it. And I'm 5'3". And so I felt like I was hanging over everything. And it was just that people didn't think about, well, there's experiences that other people have. And that, I mean, you to get into our second bucket, you don't think about one person's experience. You don't think about two. You think about the performer's experience. You think about the people who are in the room's experience. You think about the people who are not in the room's experience. And so if you're like, okay, we found this technology or tech, probably with you, 10 technologies that we're going to combine. And now what about the people? I mean, maybe the people come first or whatever, but how do you balance the 50, 100 thousands of people experience within this, especially if you want to defy each of their expectations?
It's funny because a lot of it comes from my use of lighting and how much I learned from lighting stages and shows and things like that. Because one of the things that I do is I barely light things from away. Like if I'm lighting a play, I won't sit at the front. I won't sit within the director's table. I'll sit inside the stage and I'll start calling lights. I mean, obviously, this is the actors are not there, and I'll start calling lights being inside the stage because I have an idea what it needs to look like, and so then I'll light it for the actor so that they can feel the presence of where they're supposed to be and how it's supposed to be, and does this actually feel like it should be? And then once I've lit it, then I go outside and then I look at things and then I make my adjustments to it. But
So that they
everything is
can really be there, right? If
so
it's supposed to feel a certain way.
so I can feel it that way. So as a designer, I'm going, okay, does that feel correct? And I'm like, "Oh, no, if I'm saying this line, the light shouldn't be coming from this. Like that just feels odd. Maybe I needed to have it over that. And I just play with that. And then, it's just like I start carving it. My first pass of lighting is usually from the inside. And then I come out and then I start cleaning it. And then once I have it done from the front, I'll go and I'll look at it from the left and the right and the top and to see if everybody's getting it. And you're just kind of starting to figure out every single element. And then once the actors come in, I'll still talk to them and go, how does that feel? Does that feel good? Does that feel bad? Is this allowing you to be more in the character? Am I taking you out of the character? Like all these different elements of don't worry about it. You're being seen by everybody else. Like, or maybe I am hiding you. I am hiding you in this way, so you don't have to, you don't have to perform that way. And so by thinking straight up from the way and the vulnerability of what the actor needs to go through, and then from there projecting everything that goes out. That sort of way is the same way that I build the concepts that I'm making. I usually think about it of just looking at it from the inside and going, well, if I'm the interactor, if I'm going through these things, what is it? Like, do I need that to be more to the left, more to the right? Does that feel correct? Will I actually, and so, and then, eventually you get people in and you start seeing how they behave and you go, okay, let's fix this out of that. But a lot of these elements it comes from thinking, how how is the performance? How is the main ingredient to all this is how is this central part of the performance, and then from there, if I know that the performance is generating everything that I needed to generate, now let me go to every single one of these other audiences that I can have and what can they get based on the technology that they're using or their position on stage or their position in the audience or the whatever else is that I'm giving them, and how is that going to translate to them and make it unique to them so that they're not sharing this experience. They're sharing the core experience, but they get to see something that the other person doesn't get to see or doesn't get to
Which
experience.
I mean, that is so much fun. I mean, I said I was listening to a lot of it, and you're like different memories that people have, and like the interaction over time, and how does that? because I want to get to the interconnection between people, but let's go first to the like individual different experiences. So you talked about light, but it's beyond light for you, I feel like.
Yeah, but it's the same way that, and this is something that comes from the training with John, is I always say that I look at everything as a painter, right? And I look at the world as a painter, and I understand the world as a painter, and that's pretty much the same thing where I'm trying to understand that moment and how that is seen from the different people, how it's experienced, how that can change. And for example, in Cosmos is really interesting because I have an audience and 350 people, and I have a person going through the entire experience in VR. And so the way that the story is written, the climax of the story for the audience is about 45 seconds before it is for the interactor, right? And then but the resolution and the tranquility that the interactor gets, it's probably about a minute or two before the audience actually gets it. So it's understanding what they're going to get, what he's going to get, how everything's going to be, and just messing around with each one of these elements to play with a cocktail in a certain way to make it visible and understandable for everybody.
Now, does it vary across? I mean, you've worked in fashion, you work with musicians, you work like you work in art pieces, you work like does all of it, do you think, okay, if I'm the lead singer of the band, this is how it has to feel. If I'm the drummer, this is how it has to feel. If I'm in the audience in the front row, this is how, like, do you build it out or, I mean, along the runway, do you think in that same kind of way with your, I would, I mean, dare I say it feels more simplified in those situations than some of your art pieces
Oh yeah.
are.
A fashion show is actually a lot easier in that sense, right? In fashion, you have to think about your front row people. You think about the people that are not in front row, and then you think about your cameras, right? That's like, and then you have to think about your cameras in like the photographers and the people that are doing video, right? And the reality of it is the pre-show element is for the audience. Yeah. The first look of the runway show is for the audience that is there and the anticipation that comes. Once the models are out there, I could care less about the audience because it's all about the cameras, because they're the ones that are going to take that show to the rest of the world. Yeah. And then they need to have clean, beautiful shots that they can send all over the world. Yeah. And then when we get into finale, then it's back to the audience that is in there. So it's like I switch who's more important to me depending on which moment of the show I'm in, because I know who I'm trying to satisfy. Yeah. If it's a bit too bright for the people at the venue, I don't care, because they're going to see the clothes and they're going to see them really nicely. But it's more about the people that are seeing it or are going to see it on the picture so that they can see the detail that I need to see. If you're doing a show for example, I just did a show that is for broadcast. And it's a show in which from the beginning, I am told this is for broadcast. So broadcasting cameras take everything from me. Like I'm looking at them, I'm going, I need to make sure that my colors are correct, my exposure is correct, my dynamics are correct, the way that the musician is going to be correct, the way that the audience looks this is interesting, because he has to look for camera. And if people go, oh my God, yeah, but you cannot kill the vibe of the room by doing it this way. I go, how did it look on camera? Oh yeah, on camera it looked fantastic. Then I'm okay with it, because I know that my audience and the one that I'm trying to satisfy is those 14 cameras that are around the room. Yeah. Whereas if I'm at a festival or I'm in a show where the cameras have just been invited to record the show, then I go, guys, you need to adapt to me because I'm doing this for the 20,000 people that have come to see the show. They are now the most important people that I'm looking at. And I want them to feel like they've never seen a show like this. Right. So it's being able to shift that focus and understand what are the needs for each one of them. And so you just have to be careful of understanding who's king and who's the most important thing in the room at that point.
No, absolutely. I think that it's so fascinating because I also jump a lot, like in the book and in the classes. Like 20 plus different industries. And then so I'll have a conversation and I'll be like, well, it applies to this industry versus this industry versus, and people are like, what are you talking like? Because most people don't cross industries, just like for you, most people don't cross technologies or different kinds of art experiences or how to do it. So I want to, I guess, push to the next level in terms of individual experiences to you also have interactions between people, between technology, like as you said, the having the one person in VR and other people at home. And like after you've looked through the individual eyes of the different people, how do you then help to facilitate ways that they can work together and interact with each other?
I mean, that comes more almost, it almost becomes a metrics of a gut feeling of what I want to see. You know, like right now, I'm making a new piece and I have elements that I go, ooh, is that okay? I think it's okay. Would I want to see more? Well, what if I give you more? But then that subtracts from this. And it's almost like a balancing element of going, how far do I push something? And this is where you might have heard me talk about story keeping, right? So everyone, and I apologize to anyone who says this because I usually piss off a lot of people when I say this. And it's everyone will tell you, I'm a storyteller. You have no idea. I'm a storyteller. By the
I
way,
I
I am
haven't.
a
I've been absolutely no. There's so many people who are adjacent to what I do, and they're like, "I am a storyteller." So, and I started like looking up, like, what is storytelling? Should I be telling people I'm a storyteller? And I'm like, I don't know. So it's so funny that you bring it up because I feel like storytellers are artists to me. I'm not an artist, but keep going. Absolutely.
so yeah, so you know, so a lot of people say I'm a storyteller. So, yeah, and so I came up with this idea that I am not a storyteller. I am a story keeper. And that is, I keep only the elements that are needed to tell the story. You know, my ego has to be thrown out. So if there's something that I'm putting in there that is just fat and is just fattening the place because it showcases that I can do something spectacular, but it actually has nothing to do with the story and it doesn't add anything to the story, but it just makes me, you know, it's like putting an extra layer to the cake of crap on top of it just to make it look more delicious. It's like, take it out. Right. So when I talk about story keeping is, are you willing to keep the real elements in order to tell the story? You know, and when I get to that point, when I move into production is when I become a story keeper. Prior to that, I'm just trying to figure out all these things to see what works, what doesn't work, what sticks, what doesn't stick, what kind of things are interesting, but maybe it's like, well, that's very nice, but it doesn't add anything to the story. It doesn't give me anything. It's a nice gimmick. And if I need to have a gimmick for something, then I'll use it. But if I don't need the gimmick, then that gimmick goes away because it's how much can I streamline this so that the show is as tight as possible. Yeah. And so I consider myself a story keeper. You know, story keepers, if you think about the way that our communities have grown, and if you go from our ancestors, there's a whole lot of stories, and a lot of them passed away and no one knows about them. But the story keepers kept those stories alive for the rest of us.
No, I mean, you're very like protective. Like you're open with your vision, and then once you have the vision, the vision's been established, then it's this kind of protecting what you've created. And so that kind of brings us to our third bucket. I wish I could come up, I need to come more creative word than bucket. But you bring together so many different creative tools, and even within, it's not just, oh, we have music and we have dance and we have theater and but even within the individual, like even within dance, we're going to have all these different kinds of dance. Within music, we're going to have all these different kinds of music. How do you decide which ones? How do you balance? And I know that probably some of it is just gut, but that filtering process, but then also adding more. I guess that's where that sort of balance between the two. If you could talk about that as you're creating.
In reality, a lot of it comes from this sort of repetition that goes through my head, right? So I have this thing when I paint that I say that I trust my hands, I trust my eyes, and I trust my brain, and I try to get the hell out of it. Like, so I try not to put myself in, even though it's me, I try not to think about what I'm doing. And if I decide to put a line in there that is red and I think it looks weird, I try not to say, whoa, that looks weird, let's move it. It's like, no, no, no. My hands, my brain, and my eyes have figured out that that line needs to be there. And then like 10 hours later, 2 days later, you realize that that red line actually gives depth or gives something that wouldn't exist otherwise, right? And so this is kind of what I do in terms of I'll sit there and I go, right, so maybe what we're doing is this kind of movement. And in that kind of movement, we're going to need a string, right? And so, oh, maybe, yeah, what if we do it with cellos? And you start, like, okay, well, that with a cello, what does that transmit? What is this? And I'm just like, in the back of my head is going. And then it goes like, oh, you know what? Like, maybe because of what we're doing with the guitar, actually it shouldn't be a cello, you know? And because the guitar is going and it's picking this thing, right? And it's very, very dun, 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 dun. And you go, well, the cello could do it, but it would be a pizzicato. So it goes dun, 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 dun. And you go, but it'll be too much. So it actually needs to be a bit more harmonious into it. It can be a pizzicato. So therefore it needs to switch. But a violin won't give it to me. And a viola will be too much. Actually, you know what I really need? I need a harp, because a harp is going to be able to do the same kind of structures, but it's going to be able to create some harmonies. Okay, so let's move to the harp and let's look for a harp. You know, like that's the kind of thinking that goes behind it, of going, right. Or, oh, well, what if we had a children's choir and all of a sudden they're doing
Such
this
a
element.
conductor, like your conductor of technologies, of music, of people, like in that real way of like it's all creating more than each piece combined, by putting it together and deciding where and when. I mean, that's what it feels like, so much of
It's
that,
kind of
even though it's
what,
an artist. I mean, it's
yeah.
art too.
But I quite like the idea that of I'm conducting like the physical and the technology elements, and the people, their instrument is not a musical instrument, but their instrument is a MIDI player, it's a computer, and they're adding to all these things. This is why I have been advocating for real time for the longest time, because I love the idea that I can give an artist the possibilities of real time, of changing the way that it is. And so, for example, in Unique, where I give people the opportunity to move around in the VR headset to spaces, and also that the room is gonna have an interaction with that person as they approach the wall, and then there's a harmony that's gonna come out of them approaching that, which means they're gonna have a different experience to the person that went to the right to look at that plant, and also the plant is gonna give them something, or and so this idea of I'm gonna give rewards to the interactors that are willing to explore, that are willing to look for things, and the more that you explore, the more that you get out of these experiences. And that's always been the idea. So, but also the fact that nothing can repeat itself, so that every single time that we do something is different. So in Cosmos, for example, when you start, there's a sound immediately. And then if you go left and you see, if you go down, you're going to find another sound, which immediately negates other sounds, but opens other sounds. And then you go somewhere else, and that's going to negate another set of sounds, but it's going to open another set of sounds. So unless two people do exactly the same movement, which is very, very weird for that to happen, they always start with the same kind of things, but then little by little, they find different things. And then you have this really funny conversations when you're sitting down, like, and you hear people going, oh, but did you hear, did you hear the girl in the radio? It's like, there was no girl on the radio, but there was a guy on the TV. No, there was no guy on TV, but there was a girl in the radio. No, 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 no. And so everyone's kind of making this idea of what is it that they saw or they heard, or the linear story is the same, but every little element of it changes. In Unique, there's a moment when we drop you into this level, and there's two butterflies, and you can follow one butterfly, or you can follow the other. And if you follow this one, you're never going to be able to achieve the other one, right? But so you enter a room and there's a whole lot of things happening. So there could be two people at the same time doing the experience, but they went to two different rooms and they have no idea that the other person is in the other room. And so they, and they have completely, when they come out, it's like, oh yeah, when the cello was doing this on that part of the music, like, that didn't happen. Well, it didn't happen to me. It's like, and it's just, I love playing with the concept of what people think it happens and the memory. And once again, this is all about this idea of the visual side of, well, this happened, so that must have been real. Well, it was real for you, but it was not real for that other person, and that by itself generates this thing that I keep going is how do I make you come back? How do you come back every single time? If you look at things like Punch Drunk or Secret Cinema, or all these other elements of how people keep going and repeating because they want to find new elements into it. And is how can I make experiences that make people want to see it over and over and over again? And that's really the goal of everything that I'm trying to do, is trying to make something that is irrepeatable and that is unique to you, so that you can take it to your place and go, well, I'm the only person that's ever seen it this way.
Which is it's such a human experience in general. Like people think that they have shared experiences, and they do in a certain way, but there's no exact person exactly like you doing exactly what you've done, no matter where you are. So what is it, that kind of thing, that inspires you in general? Like I guess what inspires the inspirational person? How about that? Like, what do you see or do that you're like, gosh, or is it figuring out each of these elements that do it?
It's the child in me that wants to be satisfied. There's a child in me that wants to go and say, wow, I wanna try that again. I want to see that again. There's a writer called Haruki Murakami, and he has a book with Seiji Osawa, right? And Seiji is my favorite conductor. And Seiji tells you about when he's doing mala and how difficult it is to do mala, and how every time he conducts it, he finds something different in it. And how even from his own experience of how he matures and understands the horns better, or the strings, or what that solo means, and the fact that you can keep on evolving as your ear evolves, and as it's exactly the same thing of how can I create something that just keeps evolving by itself and growing and giving you all these different things over and over again, so that you want to come back to see what the hell is he doing this time, or what is the difference between variation 2 and variation 3, like. And then you arrive and people like, there's people that saw variation 2, variation 3 of unique, and they were just like, you're telling me they're coming from the same score? And it's like, yes, there's the same score. And like, how? How is it that there's like, why? In what mind? It's like, what's this comes from the same score, but then there's all the variations that we do into it. So the root is the same, but the final output has moved so far from each other that you will never find it. But that's humans. I just saw this piece from Staya the other day, in which called Ancestors, which I thought it was lovely, because he was like, you meet somebody and you technically have a child together, right? And so you have a picture of the child and you name it, and then after a little bit they go, right, now find the next picture, and then now this is not your daughter or your so somebody's like, it's your grandson and your granddaughter, right? But now you have to find the other, like the other couple, that now that together are having your grandson, right? And all of a sudden you realize, okay, there's 4 of us, and you have a little conversation and you discuss, and what are the things that each kid has brought to this grandson. And then after 5 minutes, he goes, okay, now find it. And you find the next person, and you realize that, okay, the next one is my great grandson. But all of a sudden, I'm going to join 8 other people. And all of a sudden you go, right, at this point, that person doesn't even know that. And then you do another one, and now you're 16, and also you realize the exponentiality of how we exist in this earth. And you go, how much of me is going to exist in 3 generations down, as much as how much do I remember of my great grandfather, and how, like, and so this existential side of it, it's really interesting for me of how can I generate these elements for you to kind of try to lose and discover things as they were new. And so trying to see the piece in a headset versus seeing it in your mobile versus seeing it in the stream versus seeing it, technically they are the same performance, but because of the technology in which you watch, it changes the dynamics of how you feel about the piece. And it's amazing to think about it that way. Like if you think about when you watch a DVD, not that they exist anymore, but if back in the day when you used to buy like DVDs of a concert, right? And you will have all these cameras and all this kind of thing. You were going, oh, great. But it didn't exactly match what it was like to be in, and the honest goodness truth is sometimes you have a better seat by moving all those cameras and the poor fella who's sitting in row quadruple Z, all the way at the top of the arena. But
Unless you're lighting it.
yes, but that idea of his experience to my experience to somebody who was at the show, to, like that for me is a very interesting place of how we relate to each other in terms of how we see things.
Wow. Thank you so much for for coming and chatting with me. This has been a thrill, and I kept on wanting to talk more and more about different individual things you were saying. And now because I have that thing in my brain too of like and connecting to this and connecting to that, and it's just amazing to see and listen to how you think. Now I know that you always are working on tons of things at the same time. Maybe we look to what's coming next year for you that people can be on the lookout for.
So there's a joke of my friends. I go, how many pieces is Tupac working on at the same time? And in a regular basis is between something between 6 to 10. I have a piece that I started writing in 2003 that I still haven't arrived to it because technology hasn't arrived to where I needed to be in order to perform it. Right. And then there's all the things that kind of come into my circuit and I go, okay, that's so someone calls it like I just grabbed all these moons, so like I'm gravitating and it's like, well, like you come over here, come join my solar system for a little bit and let's see how things can be. Right now, I'm working on three things mainly. So those are where my R&D and research is going mainly into it and development. One of them will have to be performed before June of next year, which is a mixed reality piece, trying to understand the life of a human across 7 decades of his life. So it's quite an endeavor of what we're trying to do. At the same time, I'm writing an immersive theater piece, which has my producers very worried just by the sheer ambition of what I'm trying to do and also the sheer cost that it will have. So, we're trying to figure out ways. And then I'm starting to work on a new collection to actually have a solo show by 2026 of paintings and sculptures and installations. So it's very varied on that side. And unique is always roaming around talking to people, and at any given point someone's going to say, yes, let's do it, let's do this, and then all of a sudden I need to sit down with the LLM and teach it how to do a new style of music. It could be Turkish music, it could be Irish music, it could be whatever. We were actually looking at potentially doing an Americana version, which would be really interesting because I really want to teach it the sideways guitar and see what it does.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming and chatting with me on podcast today. It's been an absolute thrill. I hope everyone who gets to listen to it gets as inspired as I am today. So, yeah, no, I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.